Arc 7, The Land of the Wolves. Chapter 40, Natchuki Subawu. Subaru. Subaru's throat froze upon regarding his own face reflected in the mirror. It was a face he recognized, but a face he felt reluctant to say he was used to seeing, which came as no surprise, as his face reflected in the mirror was a relic of the past, no more than a fading memory. For that which was reflected there was the face of a young Natsuki Subaru. Subaru, what is this? The hand grasping the mirror trembled, the pale face of the young boy rocking minutely and repeatedly. His other hand, the one not holding the mirror, reached for his face as if to check it, and fingers that were smaller than those in his recollections, ones befitting the young face, came into view through the mirror. Judging from the facial features and height, that was a roughly 10 years old Natsuki Subaru. Subaru was a mischievous boy whose stature was slightly over average, having reached the average height for a Japanese person only once his limbs had fully developed. With certainty, he had been a pipsqueak back then, at the time of elementary school. To speak of his perspective at the time, he had wished to grow up as fast as he could. Subaru, what the hell is this? Look. In the mirror, his lips and eyes appeared to shake, and not just because his hands were trembling. It was also a clear sign that his soul was rejecting the abnormal situation reflected in his eyes. It was a sight worth being dubbed a nightmare. Were this simply rejuvenation, then more than a few people who dreamed of such a thing existed. Unfortunately, Subaru, as a flowering teenager, had nothing to do with such desires. Even if it was a great wish of his, however, he would probably attach the condition that he wants to choose the right time and place. That was how absurd this state of emergency was. Subaru, I can't stay like this, look. After a long time, Subaru came to himself and rushed to his bedroom door. By no means would the inn's lodgings have a perk such as rejuvenation. It was natural to think that this was an attack from someone hostile. He had to hurry and share the information with his friends staying at the same inn, to come up with a plan to overcome this obstacle. Subaru, guys, we're in trouble. You may be surprised by the suddenness of this. Oh, I knew it, Subaru's chin got smaller too. Subaru, wah? The moment he twisted the doorknob, which felt as if it were higher and heavier than usual, and opened the door with great force, he was greeted by an unexpected sight. Nay, it was a sight he should have expected. Outside his bedroom, in the living room where several people had gathered, Subaru was greeted by a girl with a lovely face and a cheerful smile, waving her hand. Her clear blue eyes and golden hair with its characteristic weave, her unmistakable sunny clarity allowed Subaru to connect the girl to the woman in his recollections. Subaru, am medium-san. Medium, that's right. When I woke up, I was so surprised to see how tiny I was. But I'm relieved to see Subaru-chin's tiny too. Buddies. The one who spoke these words with her hands in the air in jubilation was a girl of about 12 or 13 years of age, wearing a thin cloth wrapped around her bare skin. She had declared herself to be medium O'Connell. Albeit she was quite tall for a woman, having been caught up by the same phenomenon as Subaru, her size had shrunk considerably. However, she was still half a head taller than the shrunken Subaru. Anyhow, Subaru, not a situation in which you can simply be happy that you found a buddy. As Subaru tried to swallow his initial shock, his body was blown away by an impact to his side, and someone pressed down on his upturned chest. At the feeling of pressure, Subaru unconsciously raised a shriek like that of a squashed frog. Medium, Louis-John, you can't do that. Because Subaru-chin's so tiny. Louis, you. Medium, Kia. I can't lift Louis-John because I'm too tiny. Medium desperately tried to pull away the fierce beast flailing on Subaru's chest. However, her shrunken arms were not enough to stop the savagery of this evil and tyrannical being. With that, the young Natsuki Subaru was about to be laid waste to, with no way to do anything about it. Louis, don't. Subaru's going to be crushed. Louis, ahook. Along with a sharp reprimanding voice, the heavy monster on his chest was removed. When he looked, Louis, now away from Subaru laying on his back, for some reason had a sad look on her face. The one to put her hands under Louis's armpits and lift her up was Terita. Her appearance, with her blue-dyed black hair, was no different from what Subaru knew. Medium, Terita-chan, thanks. I wasn't strong enough. Terita, and no, it wasn't much. Subaru, are you okay? Subaru, oh, yeah, you saved me. I'm so glad you're the same, Torita-san. Anne. He took the hand that Medium offered him and raised himself up, then looked at the back of the room. There, sitting on the sofa, silently observing the flurry of events that had just taken place, was the dark-haired man whose face was covered by an Oni mask, Abel. Subaru was relieved to see him unchanged, but he also had a few thoughts on how he had not tried to help at all. Subaru, nothing happened to Abel. His appearance, the fact that he was hiding his face included, had not changed since yesterday. Whether it should be called a blessing or not could not be gauged at this point. However, the fact that Abel, whose face he could not see, did not welcome this situation could be seen from the displeased air that came through the Oni mask without a hitch. In fact, as proof of his unsettled state of mind, he turned his gaze to Subaru and said, "Abel, this is a disgrace." And with a mere sentence, he was able to disregard the situation. "Subaru, I think I'm rather cute and charming." Having received a blunt remark, Subaru's gut reaction was to spit out a retort. However, Subaru himself knew very well that this was nothing more than a sarcastic remark. The abnormal situation that had befallen him and Medium, which did not seem to affect Abel, Torita, and Lewis. "Subaru, if that's the case, the other ones." "Oh, I'm glad you're paying attention, bro. I was afraid you'd forgotten about me." Subaru, hook. Just as Subaru was wondering about the last of his companions staying at the inn, the answer was presented to him. Eyes wide open, Subaru turned around to see a dark-haired figure in front of him, one that had come out of another bedroom. He was a boy around the same age as Subaru, around 10 years old. His strange appearance was quite eye-catching. After all, the boy was wearing a suitably torn cloth wrapped around his face, as to hide his appearance. "Subaru, Al, right. What's with the covering?" "Al, my helmet doesn't fit anymore. The only thing I could think of was to wrap a cloth around my head instead. Don't mind it too much." "Subaru, even if you tell me not to mind it, it's going to be on my mind." Then the young Al, his face hidden, waved his right hand at Subaru. Because less was covered compared to the helmet he usually wore, his tied black hair, habitually hidden, was exposed. It reminded Subaru of the way Abel used to conceal his face with a piece of cloth before sporting the Oni mask, but the way Al had wrapped his was looser. He looked just like a cheap-looking killer in a movie. "Subaru, I know you can't wear your helmet, but do you have to cover your face?" "Al, oh, that's a statement without delicacy, bro. I ain't wearing the helmet for style or as a whim, but as the manifestation of a complex. Even if I'm now a child in appearance with the intellect of an adult, it doesn't make it any less real. It ain't like my arms grown back. That means the scars on my face haven't disappeared either. It's the same for you, bro, right?" "Subaru, that's..." As Al said this, he showed his left arm, which was unchanged, his upper arm still in a state of having been lopped off, proving that Al's perception of the current situation was correct. Those three people, made up of Subaru and Al, as well as Medium, were unintentionally rejuvenated. It was not that time had rewound, however, it was a clear change in their bodies. "Subaru." In response to Al's words, Subaru also flipped up his own loose-fitting shirt, and confirmed that the old scars all over his body had not vanished. His small child body was covered with all sorts of scars that made him want to look away. The years he had spent in this other world had not disappeared. He had never really thought that there would be a day when he would be relieved by the existence of those scars. Despite that, the scars had taught him something. That this was a situation in which his limbs had simply shrunk. However, Al, a misfortunate destiny such as having our limbs shrunken doesn't just happen at random. Medium, right. This might mean I'm not gonna be able to help Big Bro with his work. He's way too weak, so this is a big problem. Subaru, it's definitely true that it's a big blow to the O'Connell siblings' business, but it spelled trouble for long-term business plans for sure. However, there was certainly also a heap of trouble short-term. Currently, Subaru's problem was that, due to him being misshapen, he did not have any clothes that fit. Such was not the case for Al and Medium, though. "Subaru, Al, you mentioned that your helmet doesn't fit, what about your weapons?" "Al, good catch. I can't wield one with my cute lil arm." "Medium, it might be hard for me to hold both of them. But I should be able to manage one." "Ah." "Subaru, watch it." Medium drew one of her twin swords from the scabbards at her side, but the blade slipped through her grip and nearly sliced Subaru's knee. Albeit barely, the tip of the blade almost grazed Subaru, then stabbed into the floor, bringing him horror. Medium, wow, Subaru-chin, I'm sorry. Subaru, it didn't cut me, but that's pretty bad. With a sullen sigh, Medium pulled out the stuck sword and carefully put it back in its sheath. The weapon she had been able to use so freely just the previous day were now in a wholly unusable state. To Medium, whose expected active role was that of a fighter, this was a crisis that shook her to her core. The same could be said for Al, though not in terms of his military prowess. Subaru, this means that Torita-san's the only one with any legitimate fighting strength at the moment, right? Medium, what? I'll do my best even if I'm small, you know. Subaru, I appreciate the spirit, but you don't meet the labor standards. Medium's undampened attitude was nice, but a realistic view of the situation was also required. With both Al and Medium in this state, the only one able to fight properly was Torita. And even if she was assured of her abilities, it would be a lonely endeavor amidst enemy territory. Torita, it's only me. In fact, Torita was evidently accepting the pressure herself. The reason for this was that the roles that would otherwise have been shared could no longer be divided, and must now be carried on her two shoulders. He felt guilty to her for that, but... Subaru, it's going to be quite a burden. But what do we do from here? It seems like they'd have eyes on us, but should we escape from Chaos Flame? Al, so, you think it was that sexy lady castle owner who did this, bro? Subaru, the three of us were the only ones affected. Having been asked that by Al, Subaru quietly nodded his head. It went without saying that Subaru, Al, and Medium had a single thing in common: all of them had gone to the Crimson Lapis Castle as messengers the previous day. That being the case, it was perfectly legitimate to suspect Yorna's involvement in the circumstances of their shrunken limbs. Abel, it seems that you are not as distraught as I had expected. Abel, who had been quietly ruminating about the contents of Subaru and Al's conversation, interrupted them. Sure, Subaru had been quite distraught right after waking up, but now that he had run into Al and Medium in the same situation, his agitation had lessened considerably. In a way, it was possible to say that buddies, as Medium had put it, truly existed. And yet... Subaru, perhaps I just missed the timing to be surprised and panicked. Maybe after I find more inconvenient things with this body, then I'll realize the importance of my lost height and weight. Abel, even though you have shrunk, you are a man who always feels the need to talk. Subaru, adaptability and cleverness are two of my few selling points, that's why. He was being increasingly scorned for ceaseless chatter, but Subaru still retorted without regard. Sure enough, Abel's gaze from behind the Oni mask became sharper, and he muttered with visible exasperation, "You talk too much." However, he did not stop at that, and resumed his words. Abel, you can discard your suspicions about Yorna Miss Higure. Your transformations differ from the principle of the techniques employed by that thing. Subaru, are you sure? Abel, as far as I can surmise, yes. It is up to you to decide whether this is worth believing. Abel directly denied the suspicions held by Subaru just before. However, it seemed that the basis for this denial lay only within Abel. Subaru's mouth curved in frustration as he was told that he was free to decide whether it was to be trusted or not. Despite this, it did not take him long to mull it over. Subaru. I understand. But if it wasn't Yorna, then who was it? Abel, perhaps it was Albert Dunkelkin who caused it. Subaru, Albert. That old man from yesterday? Abel mentioned the name of the architect of this situation to Subaru, who, swallowing his dissatisfaction, placed trust in his speculation. What had come from his mouth was the name of the false emperor's companion they had run into at the Crimson Lapis Castle the previous day, a diminutive old man who was said to be one of the 9 divine generals. Among the Empire's strongest and labeled a general first class, he was a person who had been bestowed with the 3rd rank from the top. Naturally, Subaru had anticipated him to be a man possessing might which was not to be taken as trivial, but... Subaru, I didn't expect him to be such a freaky person who can bring about such nonsensical situations. Abel, I know not the depths of his abilities. But you cannot deny what has happened. There are other possibilities aside from Albert when it comes to forging one's external appearance. Subaru, unfortunately, it doesn't look like a hallucination or anything. He had already tried pinching his cheeks and waking up from what seemed like a dream. The possibility that magic or drugs were messing with his perception and making him hallucinate was null. The fact that his arms and legs were actually short, and that he had been unable to push back against Lewis's strength and weight, posed as pretty good evidence. The physical effects on the body, such as the size of Subaru's clothing and Al's helmet, could not be overlooked. Abel was probably also regarding it as unlikely, as he had not made any special effort to object to Subaru's insistence that it had an actual, real effect. Subaru, first of all, it's good that we don't have to run away with our tails between our legs. How troublesome. Even the Emperor, Abel, doesn't know how that old man fights? Who the hell is he? Abel, he is the head of a group that has mastered a special technique called shinobi. Subaru, shinobi. A ninja? Abel. What is that? Abel questioned Subaru while raising his eyebrows, the latter having blurted something out unintentionally. When one heard of the word shinobi, their first reflex would be to think of ninja, which had the same meaning. However, it appeared that the latter word sounded new or strange to Abel. But to Subaru, much like when he had first learned about Kararaji dialect and Wafu-style architecture, he thought it seemed to be knowledge of the world Subaru knew, or felt like a slight remnant of it. Subaru, these shinobi, do they use ninjutsu, or do they go undercover in the darkness of night to spy on or assassinate people? Abel, I have never heard of ninjutsu, but you understand the main function of the shinobi. That too, is not supposed to be information that reaches the public easily. Subaru, there's something similar in my homeland, they're called ninjas. Right, Al? Al, whom? Yeah, right. They're a quartet of turtles with a great sense of humor. Perhaps he felt the same tug as Subaru, but Al's answer was a bit off the mark as Subaru thought about it. They were characters from a popular cartoon of yesteryear, though Subaru did not dislike them. Anyway, even if he explained the details, Abel would not comprehend it, and it seemed the latter viewed it as a pointless topic to delve into, as he did not make any attempt to ask him about the details. Instead, Medium let out a "oh," with her big eyes open wide. Medium, if it was that Gramps of yesterday who did it, it could be that. You know, when we escaped from the castle. Subaru, when we escaped. Ah. Medium, when me and you were both struck in the chest. Medium's cry was a bit misleading, but Subaru had an inkling of what was up. It had come to pass the previous day, during their escape from the Crimson Lapis Castle, in the middle of the life-threatening battle to fulfill Yorna's nasty conditions. Subaru and his group had escaped from the false emperor's bodyguard Kappa's thorns, and broken through the walls of the castle in an attempt to escape, only for each of them to be pierced by the blow of the pursuing Albert. However, that divine general's attack had not caused any damage to Subaru's group. At that time, that had gone all right. But it could not have been harmless. Subaru, that said, it's normal that something like this couldn't have been predicted. I mean, that explains me and Medium-san, but Al? Why did you shrink? Al, sorry, bro. I had a few run-ins with the old man before I jumped out. It wouldn't be surprising if he'd hit me at some point. I figured that if the wound didn't kill me, it'd be a no count. In a low tone, or, at least, in as much of a low tone as a boy whose voice had yet to drop could muster, Al blamed himself for his lapse with a grumble. But it was wrong for Al to blame himself. Al had done his part and allowed Subaru and Medium to survive in that desperate situation. The same can be said for Medium. So, it was Subaru who should have known. If he could not be of use in a battle, he should have been aware of every eventuality. The result of failing to do so was this disgrace, as Abel had said. Subaru, I can't let Rem see me like this. If I'm the same size as Biko, Emilia will treat me like I'm younger than she is even more. Al, even if I've been shrunken down, I don't think it likely that the princess'll treat me affectionately like she does Shulchan, so I wonder who benefits from this development. Tarita, I'm surprised that everyone is so calm. I'm still confused. A pale Tarita revealed her innermost thoughts, as Subaru and Al discussed their shrunken bodies. With Lewis flopping in her arms, Tarita's bewilderment was palpable, due to being the sole remaining fighting force. It was almost as if she felt guilty for having escaped harm. Of course, Tarita was the one who was physically and mentally normal in this situation. Subaru, honestly, I feel like I'd start screaming if I didn't joke about it a bit. Tarita, is that so? Subaru, yeah. It's that revolting. It was not his young body. His own body had been unintentionally remade. The disintegration of the definition of the self was sickening. Subaru. Subaru was rather proud of himself for having faced a variety of experiences in this other world thus far. Although the experience of death was the most extreme, it was quite possible to say that the dense experiences of the past year and a half were incomparably richer in color, taste, and density than that of an ordinary person. Compared to any of these experiences, the inexpressible disgust that came with the feeling of being remade stuck out. Subaru, this is what it feels like to be one of lust's victims. The sound of wings echoed in Subaru's mind as he hugged his thin, small shoulders and clenched his teeth. It was the sound of the wings of those who had fallen victim to the authority of the sin archbishop of lust in the Watergate City, the memory of the victims whose bodies had been morphed into that of flies, and were still waiting to be saved. The tragedy of these people, who had been transformed into something else, easily transcended Subaru's flimsy understanding of their situation. The very act that had compelled such a sensation was able, vicious, I would state. With arms crossed, Abel accurately guessed Subaru's innermost thoughts, causing the latter's breathing to hitch. Meeting Subaru's unsteady gaze with his own. Abel, Albert's nickname, is Vicious Old Man. And as befits his name, he makes use of the shinobi arts to carry out all kinds of special tasks, vicious and otherwise. Al, special operations, huh? So does he get ridiculous requests like go make the target into a baby? Abel, what kind of absurd instructions are those? But witnessing this disastrous scene, I would guess that would not be impossible. Al. Abel's response to Al, however, had a weight to it that could not be laughed off as a joke. As a matter of fact, since Subaru, Al, and Medium were made this young, it was impossible to even guess the capabilities of Albert's techniques and their extent. And with that as their grasp of the situation, the thing that made them most anxious at the moment would be Subaru, this can be undone, right? Abel, I cannot state with certainty, but I believe it reasonable to assume a way to return you to normal exists. Subaru, what makes you say that? Abel, the only pretext for poisoning someone and not have them die immediately is to negotiate with them. Hearing Abel's speculation and their justification, Subaru was also convinced with no further words. This phenomenon, which may be called infantilization for the sake of convenience, could be likened to the act of poisoning, and the other party's intention would be to avoid immediate death. This was a strategy to extract some kind of concession. Tarita, then, if there's some kind of contact from the other party. Abel, I shall reiterate. I cannot state it with certainty. But Abel looked over at Tarita, who was holding her breath, and said that her high hopes were poisonous. And just as Abel was about to resume speaking, from outside, there was a knock on the door of the room. Subaru, hook. Because of the previous conversation, everyone's attention and tension turned to the door. Subaru also stiffened, thinking of it as a possible sign of contact from Albert, who had brought about the infantilization. However, my apologies for disturbing you this morning. I am Yorna Miss Higure-sama's messenger. The voice that came through the door was a disappointing one at this point in time. That disappointment was the reason as to why the tension that had been building up loosened at a sluggish pace. On the other hand, Subaru belatedly understood that a messenger from Yorna signified a reply to yesterday's letter. In addition to that, he also noticed the owner of the voice bringing the reply. Medium, this voice is that of the dear girl from yesterday, isn't it? See, it's Tanza-chan. Subaru, looks like it. Good. Then I can let her come in, right? With a nod to Medium, who held up a finger, Subaru asked Abel if he wanted her to enter the room. At Subaru's gaze, Abel paused for a moment, then nodded slowly. Having received this cue, Subaru turned to go to the door and greet his visitor. Tarita, no, I will. Interrupting Subaru, Tarita took the initiative and stepped forth. She left Lewis in Medium's hands and ushered Subaru and the others back, away from the door. As far as this matter was concerned, it must be said that Subaru was the one who lacked a sense of danger. Even if it had not passed his mind, he could not just open the door devoid of any protection. And currently, the shrunken Subaru's vigilance was no different from being defenseless. Tanza, my apologies for disturbing you. I have come to deliver the words of Yorna-sama. The one to bow and step over the doorsill to reveal herself was, just as they had thought, Tanza, the dear girl. Just like yesterday, once the kimono-clad girl stepped into the room, she met the gazes of those greeting her and paused. It was unclear what the expressionless girl thought of the unusually large number of children in the room. However, it should be noted that her gaze had lingered the longest on the suspicious man wearing an oni mask. Anyway, after the girl surveyed the room. Tanza, what happened to the messengers from yesterday? Subaru, they've left for a bit, should I go get them? Tanza. No, if you could tell them later. On and off, Tanza's attention would be drawn to Abel at the back of the room. He thought she, as a child, was too good a servant, but there were some unexpectedly cute aspects to her, like the way she could not take her eyes off something interesting. Nevertheless, the report she brought would have a tremendous impact on the future of Subaru and the others. With quiet tension, they waited for Tanza's words. And then, Tanza, after reading the letter, Yorna-sama will reply formally. Therefore, I would like to request you all to report to the Crimson Lapis Castle. Subaru, she read it. Subaru felt relieved after Tanza had spoken so with a bow. Albeit rude, after everything that had passed, he suspected that Yorna tearing up the letter on a whim was not an impossible outcome. It could be said to be the same sense of insecurity as dealing with a high-strung cat or Priscilla. As if he could not find the precise approach, that was the impression he got. I ain't denying that the princess is hard to deal with, but even she discerns TPO. Well, I ain't too sure about that actually. Reading Subaru's inner thoughts from his expression, Al tried to defend Priscilla, but gave up halfway through. It was a sign that he, too, was having a hard time dealing with Priscilla, whom he had known for a long time. Anyway, he was relieved that one side of the impending situation seemed to be going smoothly. With this, the only major problem at hand was the infantilization of Subaru and the others. Tanza, I hope that the master who wrote the letter and all the messengers from yesterday will come to the castle tower. Subaru, gay. Tanza? Hearing the unintentional moan that spilled out, Tanza lowered her round eyebrows and tilted her head. In order not to allow her to notice his inner turmoil, Subaru smiled amiably and shook his head, nothing, forcibly deceiving Tanza's suspicions. Whether she was satisfied or not, Tanza straightened her tilted head and said, Tanza, we will be waiting for you at the Crimson Lapis Castle, at the time the bell of fire time rings. Abel, I understand the details. Well done. You may leave. Tanza. Yes, excuse me. The time specified, the bell of fire time, could be taken to mean roughly noon. After informing them of the setting of the meeting with Yorna, Tanza performed a curtsy, and turned away to leave the room. Excuse me, Subaru called out towards her back. Tanza, yes, what is it? Subaru, I want to make sure just in case, but the main person invited is the person who wrote the letter, and the messengers from yesterday are an extra, right? In other words, if the messengers are unable to attend due to various circumstances. Tanza, Yorna-sama has said to invite the messengers as well. Subaru. Tanza, I hope that in this demon city, you will not fail to follow Yorna-sama's words. Tanza's voice was plain, but it was a reminder of her absolute and unshakable will. Leaving that behind, he watched the departing messenger girl and shut the door. After doing that, Subaru took a deep breath and turned around. And then, Subaru, do you think we, in this state, meet the condition she just mentioned? He stretched out his changed arms and posed that question. Chapter 41, A Chat Over Tea. Subaru, Strategy Meeting. In a room so quiet a pin being dropped could be heard, Subaru raised his short arm along with this suggestion. There was no rebuttal to that remark. They all felt the need to discuss their situation. The topic of discussion was, of course, the matter of making an appearance at the Crimson Lapis Castle. Subaru, Abel, who wrote the letter, and us, who went to the castle yesterday, are indispensable. Looking down at his clothes with their sleeves and hems wrinkled, Subaru ruminated on the request from Yorna that had been left behind by Tanza, who had come as an envoy. A frown formed between his brows. He was willing to accept the risk of sending Abel directly to the castle, but his biggest concern was the condition that he should be accompanied by the messengers from the previous day. Would Yorna appreciate it if he took along the shrunken Subaru, Al, and Medium, he wondered. Worst case scenario, there was a good chance that it would be considered a prank. Alternatively, there was the option of telling Yorna all about their situation and appealing to her heart with sincerity, but Abel, it is completely devoid of reason to show your hand when you do not know the future actions of your opponent. Subaru, I see. I can't say for sure Yorna'd even listen to me either, considering yesterday's exchange. Abel refused to reveal all his cards, and Subaru agreed with him on that point. Although he had avoided saying so yesterday, if Subaru wished to describe the impression he had of Yorna, the expression evil woman would be a valid choice. The way she spoke and acted like a courtesan seemed to Subaru to be that of a temptress with excellent skills in toying with men in the palm of her hand. The danger posed by Yorna went without saying, as, in addition to her position as the lord of the Demon City, she possessed the aptness to be bestowed the title of Divine General. She was the one they had first set their sights on as a potential ally among all of the 9 divine generals. However, as Abel had warned, she was not the kind of person to whom they could easily disclose their situation to. Al, if we spanned her full with our circumstances and she then asked about you, we'd be screwed. Considering the cross-dressing and all that, what should we do if she asks something like, you dare lie to me? Subaru, I don't want to think I'll be blamed like that, but if that's the case, why don't I just pretend to be Natsumi Schwartz in lowly form? Tarita, wait, please wait. I'm afraid I'll get more and more confused too. The dilemma of making up a lie to cover up another one was a common one, but the dilemma of having to cover up cross-dressing by still cross-dressing after being infantilized would probably be unprecedented. Unlike Al's helmet, the size of the wig could be adjusted, so cross-dressing itself was possible, but whether it was necessary to go that far depended on how the story proceeded. Medium, so, what are we gonna do? The bell of fire time's in about 3 hours, remember? Subaru, pretty sure we should go to the Crimson Lapis Castle. Medium tilted her head and asked, having hold Lewis in her arms while listening. While the two of them were the same size, and Lewis was tilting her head to match Medium's, Subaru had to consult with his inner scales. Tarita, first of all, we don't have the option of not accepting Yorna's invitation, do we? Al, well, we went to a lot of trouble to have the letter read. If we don't accept it, the meaning of yesterday's hard work and us here having been shrunken would all disappear. Tarita, if anything, all that'd be left would be the damage incurred. Nodding at Al and Tarita's words, Subaru believed that retreat was not out of the question. Not returning home until the money spent was recouped, this kind of mindset was a cliché for people losing everything through gambling. Cutting one's losses would be important, in some cases. However, what would be lost in this loss-cutting was Subaru and the other's statures. Subaru, should we see this as serious or trivial? Gettin' younger's better than growin' ol'. Isn't that like the secret to eternal life? Subaru, yeah, for sure. In a sense, rejuvenation meant an increase in chances, just like return by death. If one could return to their childhood holding the knowledge and experience of an adult, they would be capable of training their physique in the most fitting way possible over time, and so, would be able to retry achieving the goals once given up on. With those as the circumstances, it seemed like they'd found some situations which could be leveraged as an advantage, however. That'd be what you'd think, right? But it's not that simple, is it? It's not something that you can easily use, you know? At that moment, a third party interrupted the discussion, and Subaru's breath stopped. No, Subaru's was not the only to stop. Everyone present in that room went rigid, unable to move at that moment, and froze at the presence of the owner of the voice. However, the person in question was unconcerned about the growing tension in the room. I've taken the liberty of making tea for myself, does anyone else want some? With that question made in a casual tone, he lifted his steamy teacup. Tarita, hook. Immediately after, Tarita moved with a bouncing motion, like a spring-loaded doll. She drew her bow in an instant and aimed her arrow at the person who had just appeared, Albert Dunkelkin. Her target was extremely close, there was zero chance she would miss or that he could dodge. But Albert shrugged his shoulders with a nonchalant, whoa, whoa. Albert, don't do it, don't do it. I don't like having pointy things aimed at me. You know, old people go to the bathroom more often than not, and you want to scare 'em into pissin' their pants? I'm shaking in my boots here, yeah? Tarita, you're kidding me. Who are you? Abel, Albert Dunkelkin. Tarita. The old man's hostile but unconcerned stature made Tarita's face flush with anger. Yet, in response to her question, the man in the Oni mask, the one who had called out Albert's name, as if to rein her in. The only one who had not moved at all, Abel, sitting on the sofa while donning his Oni mask, exchanged glances with the man. To this, Albert narrowed his eyes hidden by his thick eyebrows. Albert, well, I already confirmed yesterday that I'm a celebrity, so I'm not surprised, but you got a pretty impressive face, you know. Where's that souvenir from? Abel, spare me the nonsense, old tree. What are you here for? Albert, it's lonely these days 'cause young people don't want to listen to old people's idle chatter. The people in my village are getting better and better at ignoring me every day. Kaka. As he talked about the lonely circumstances of his old age, Albert opened his big mouth and smiled cheerfully. At the dialogue between Abel and Albert, the confusion of Subaru and the others on the sidelines slowly melted away. However, it was impossible for them to completely let their guard down. Medium, but, Gramps, how did you get in here? It's not like we weren't keeping watch. Albert, oh, doesn't this lil thing look just like the dancer from yesterday? So if Gramps has to answer, that's just how it is. Ya let the dear girl through, right? And I came in with her. Medium, together? With Tanzachan? Albert, kaka. How I got in here's a secret. Shinobi arts are like my tools of the trade. Medium's simple query was laughed off by Albert with the purpose of confounding them. It was uncertain how serious he was about this, but in any case, the word shinobi had been mentioned by him himself, and he seemed to have no intention of hiding his true identity. In that case, asking him directly about his true intentions for coming to their camp alone would be faster compared to probing him. Subaru, so? Albert, Subaru, so, what are you really doing here? Albert's gaze turned to Subaru after the latter asked the purpose of his visit. With that, the old man wrinkled his brow as if thinking for a while. Albert, yeah, was that ya? Were ya the girl in red from yesterday? I couldn't possibly mistake the dancer-like girl and the one-armed man, so I was really worried. So he confessed, he'd had a hard time figuring out who Subaru was. Hearing this, Subaru looked, and Al, casually repositioning himself, sneered. He cleared his throat through his mask, his voice more hushed than usual. Al, that's my bro. Even the shinobi head honcho didn't know who you were. Albert, oh, how impressive, how impressive. I wish the people in my village could learn from that transformation. How about being a lecturer? You'd be welcome. Subaru, unfortunately, Natsumi Schwartz's schedule's quite full. Maybe I could make some time for you, though. Albert, ho, what you mean, maybe? He moistened his lips at how cross-dressing had unexpectedly landed quite the catch, and then, noticing the sensation of thirst in his throat, Subaru narrowed his eyes. Regardless of how much he believed in this nonsense, he had to take full advantage of the opportunity to speak directly with Albert. For the time being, about the abnormal situation that had befallen Subaru and the others. As per Abel's guess, the mastermind behind this phenomenon was none other than the old man in front of him. Subaru, if you got any idea who's the reason we're like this, be honest. Albert, oh, that. I've done that myself. They're interesting, aren't they, the shinobi arts? Subaru. Without any bargaining, Albert admitted that he had been the one to do it. His statement drowning out the rest of his words, Subaru took a small gulp. And the old man laughed viciously as he watched Subaru stiffen. Albert, if I killed ya by accident, I wouldn't be able to hear anything you got to say, and I'd be left with a lot of trouble, you know? That being the case, there are many ways to squeeze info out of someone without killing. Interesting, isn't it? Albert bluntly spoke those words, and sipped his warm tea. The infantilization that had struck Subaru, Al, and Medium. From the testimony of the one acquainted with the 9 divine generals, Abel, it was almost certain that the offender was Albert. However, for it to be affirmed directly by the person himself was a different kind of surprise. Especially if the other party was not offended at all and was proud of it. Everyone. Albert, oi, we shouldn't look at each other all scary. Didn't ya learn that old people are to be cared for, not tortured? The tension in the room was rising again, and both Al and Medium, as well as Tarita, who had not lowered her bow from the onset, were gradually changing their positions. In particular, Al was prepared to block the entrance door and obstruct Albert's escape route. However, Al, with his shrunken body, could not handle his cherished sword at will, and so could not aspire to go far in stopping the shinobi head honcho that was always on the prowl. Louis, you. Albert, you're a lil girl who's got nothing to do with me, aren't ya? Then you looking at me like that's kinda hurtful. Don't ya like the sweet smell of old men? Abel, do not play games with me, Albert. I shall ask you once more. What brings you here? Abel hurled a few words at the side of Albert, who was trying to win over the snarling Louis. Taking a glance at Albert, the latter looking over his shoulder, Abel expressed a sharp spirit that could be transmitted even through the Oni mask. Abel, you have heard the thoughts of Yorna Miss Higure, lord of this demon city. She recognized them as envoys. She has made it clear that they shall not be touched. Subaru, that's right. Don't touch us, that's what yesterday's game was about. We were risking our lives too. And yet, this treatment's different from what was promised to us. Albert, oi, you're getting all excited and mixed up, you know. Taking advantage of Abel's aggressive move, Subaru also reiterated Yorna's statement from the previous day. It was as Albert had said, Subaru had gone as far as to even return to the state of mind of yesterday, regardless, that still did not change the truth. Yorna had recognized Subaru's group as messengers, and Tanza had made it clear that she would not allow anyone to interfere with them. To disregard that, was to express hostility toward Yorna. Abel, of course, if your intent is to destroy the demon city, you shall not give that the slightest consideration. Subaru, now that you mention it. With Abel's additional words, Subaru's heated blood ran cold. In fact, the fake Emperor's faction, to whom Albert belonged, had given up the right to negotiate with Yorna to Subaru and his party. Should they view it as a bad move, to just flip the table out of anger was also within their possibilities. In that case, it would be inevitable that he would clash head-on with Yorna, who was esteemed as one of the 9 divine generals, in several senses of the meaning. Abel, if you are to challenge it with the intent of destroying it, you shall avoid destruction. Of course, you shall come out of it with some damage. Albert, well, that fox girl can be tricky to deal with. However, it's no fun to have that masked young'un see right through ya. Subaru, masked, young'un. Albert scratched his chin with his fingers and pretended to be in pain. Overhearing some of his words, Subaru looked at Abel out of the corner of his eye. Abel's attitude was unchanged, but Subaru was on the edge of his seat at every step of this exchange. After all, Albert was one of the 9 divine generals. Of course, they must have seen Vincent Valaquia, aka Abel, many times. Even though he was hiding his face with a mask, if Albert were to exchange words with Abel, who had not changed his speech or tone of voice, it would not be surprising for the former to realize his true identity. Albert. However, Abel, who responded in a dignified manner, did not display any such anxiety. Albert, too, showed no signs of having perceived Abel's true identity. With that as the case, Subaru was unable to identify him, and had no choice but to act by hiding his inner fears. Anyway. Subaru, I still don't have your answer, Albert-san. Albert. Feels like I'm being treated better like this, compared to being just called an old man. So I'll let ya off the hook for pretending to be a girl. Subaru, Albert-san. Subaru's gaze sharpened on the old man, who had lost his nerve and dodged the question. Seeing this, Albert raises his hands and says, okay. Albert, the rewards for your actions are just as you said. The Fox Girl and His Excellency both have told me to stay out of it. Subaru, if that's the case. Albert, it's just that, you know. I poked you folks before yesterday's game was over, right? Then you know what? If you can't complain about dying from a sword wound you got while fighting, you can't complain about a shrinking technique you got hit with while fighting me. Subaru, that's quibbling. Albert, well, is it really quibbling? But you can't change it, can ya? Raising an eyebrow at Albert, who was laughing at his own cunning, Subaru was at a loss for words. Albert's argument was quibbling, as he himself had admitted. But on the other hand, his argument was correct as well. Even if someone lost their life because of a wound inflicted during battle, or the wound inflicted before the negotiation of a ceasefire, it would make no sense to hold someone responsible for the tragedy after the ceasefire began. However, Subaru had the impression that there was a large difference between a wound and infantilization. Albert, that's why I think that bringing you back and the Fox Girl's order are 2 different things. Do you get me? Subaru. Albert, kaka. Don't look so stern. Your cute face is ruined. That pretty face was just a sham made with cosmetics. You got me there, hook, line and sinker. Albert played with the teacup with his fingertips and showed some acrobatic skills to keep the contents from spilling. His words themselves could not be easily fought off, they had been chosen with deliberate care attained by experience. However, even if Tarita, who was becoming more and more nervous, and Al and the others, attempting to block the escape route, were to fight their best, subjugating Albert by force was nowhere in sight. If there was someone here capable of defeating this cunning, it would be Abel. Do not get carried away, Albert. Indeed, only the man donning the Oni mask tried to cut through his brimming ambition and cunning. Abel, without changing his posture, shot Albert with a look even sharper and colder, and made him stop playing with his teacup. Abel, I have already inquired you as to your purpose. How many more times must I ask until you feel like doing it? Albert, whenever there's a young'un whose expression I can't see, I can't help but want to see the wrinkles between their eyes. I hope you don't mind. With one eye closed, Albert mischievously responded to Abel's domineering spirit. The old man scratched his head and voiced, "You're a man with no time to spare." Albert, the fox girl aside, His Excellency also told me not to lay a hand on you folks, so I didn't come here to deal with cha. But if we're gonna be your enemies anyway, it wouldn't hurt ta weaken ya a wee bit, would it? Al, that may have been the reason as to why you shrunk us, but you didn't come all the way here to drink tea. Albert, looks like you're having a hard time now that your helmet doesn't fit anymore, boy. Anyhow, guess you're right about that. Ah well, the reason I'm here's that I'm here to listen to what you got to say, honestly. Subaru, what we got to say? While fiddling with his ear with the hand not holding the teacup, Albert nodded to Subaru as the latter ruminated over the question, then spoke, "That's right." With that, he then pointed out the window using the same finger that had been picking at his ear. Albert, that performance at the castle yesterday, darn it if it didn't make me giddy. But there are a lot of people who've tried to mess with His Excellency, and so far, they've all failed. So, I'd like to ask you why you decided to cross the dangerous bridge as well. Subaru, what are you going to do once you hear it? Albert, oh? Obviously I'll make a decision after hearing it. And I'm gonna do something to make sure you can't lie. With Albert's mouth open wide as he sent saliva flying along with his hearty laugh, Subaru's scrunched up into a scowl. It was easy to dismiss his attitude, as was heard just a while ago, as just bad taste. But it was clear that the conversation could not just be shut down on him. He was one of the 9 divine generals required to help Abel regain the throne, or to dispel the shinobi technique that had infantilized Subaru and the others. Rather, Subaru, a chance, is it? The position of the 9 divine generals was such that it was difficult to even contact them, nevertheless to get them on their side. But presently, for whatever reason, Chaos Flame was occupied not only by its lord, Yorna, but also by Albert in front of him and Chisha, who seemed to be posing as a false emperor. Of course, even if cajoling the opposition posed by Chisha, who had taken the initiative, was an impossibility. Subaru, if Abel's reasoning from yesterday was correct, it doesn't mean that Albert Sands confirmed as an enemy. Abel's view was that hope remained regarding Albert, who stood as one of the divine generals considered to already be the enemy's pawns. At the moment, Subaru had to say that Abel's judgment was a correct one, as he had managed to get to the point of negotiating with Yorna. If they were to believe his speculation, there should be room for negotiating Albert's position. However, in order to get Albert on their side here, Subaru. In silence, Subaru glanced at Abel's profile. Revealing the identity of the man sporting the Oni mask and keeping his dignified stance, Abel, that was the absolute most important piece of information that they must disclose in order to conquer Albert. And frankly, Subaru did not have any further information that could resonate with Albert. Subaru. The Oni masked Abel did not even wince, as he met Subaru's gaze towards his side. His face was hidden behind a mask, making it impossible to observe any of his emotions. However, there was no way that the intelligent man could not have thought of what Subaru had come up with. At this juncture, just how much of his own heart could he bear to the other party, Albert? Subaru's thought was that this would be the focal point, but since Abel had not stirred, was he premature in his thinking? Or was he waiting to see what came to pass? In any case, if they could get Albert on their side, they would find a way to solve the problem of Subaru's infantilization, their lack of strength, and the battle for the 9 divine generals. Then, this would be the right time to play. Albert, funny thing is, people's faces do say more than you'd expect, don't they? Subaru, Albert, your gaze, the way your face tenses up, the way your muscles contract just a little. You don't actually gotta move your mouth, talk a lot. Thumping his 2 fingers against his temples, Albert spoke. The old man nodded as his gaze fell on Subaru, whose breath had been taken. Albert, for example, the girl who looks like a dancer relies on the girl using the bow. The young with the cloth wrapped round his head and the wee one rely on ya. And, as for the one using the bow and ya, well, both of ya rely on that masked young. Subaru, hook. Albert, yet can see the general direction of each pair of eyes. When you're weak, it's even more obvious, isn't it? The words of Albert, who flashed his white teeth as he said them, pierced Subaru's mind. And Subaru belatedly realized that he had greatly misjudged Albert's fundamental nature. A man who had even appeared seemed to be a good-natured old man. Albert had made it clear that he was the one who had infantilized them, and that he had done so in order to talk to Subaru and the others. He had never stated that it was to negotiate with Subaru and the others. Subaru, didn't you come here to talk? Albert, come in here to talk and come in here to listen are similar but slightly different, aren't they? I don't mind chatting like this, But Subaru. Albert, you see, I'm also the shinobi head honcho, and I spend my time acting as a representative of the people of my village. That's why. I can't trust the words of someone I haven't even tortured, 'cause it's too dangerous. Without losing the air of an old man with an understanding of what he spoke about, Albert expressed his thoughts in accordance with the shinobi's unwritten rules. The bleakness and harshness of this world were certainly similar to that of the ninja world known to Subaru. However, the feeling of enjoying it as a fiction was very unlike the feeling of being exposed to it firsthand in such a manner. Albert, so, with his uppity attitude of having no one to rely on, the masked youngun's the leader, right? Let me ask ya, what was it that made you come to seduce that fox girl? Abel. If that does not work, what will? Albert, then you'll just have to find another way, won't ya? But since I'm forced to stay out of it, there's not much I can do about it. Albert shrugged his shoulders, his gaze and attention were turned towards Abel. Of course, it was hardly believable that Albert, the head honcho of the shinobi, would not be paying attention to the others. Even if his head was not turned, his attention had not been diverted from Al nor to Rita. However, even though a bow was being pointed towards him, to display any intention of attacking Albert would be unwise for Subaru and the others surrounding him. As per Yorna's command, they were to be welcomed into Chaos Flame as messengers. Whether this would still apply after causing a disturbance in Chaos Flame, and how she would deal with ill-mannered visitors, was a complete unknown. In other words, the situation here was a stalemate for both Subaru and Albert. Both had no choice but to stare each other down, declaring their readiness to do harm. And in such an extreme limbo. Subaru, but, on the other hand, in these conditions, where can I even prepare it? Reflecting on the established situation, Subaru once again cast a question to the white space that had been born within his mind. And once again, the thought arose, isn't this an opportunity? Bound by Yorna and the false emperor, Albert was unable to take any additional actions of hostility. Subaru was judging which side Albert was leaning. Supposing he was closer to the enemy side, they would have to act on this timing. They would not get any other situation like the one they had here. Everyone. At a slow pace, time progressed. Along with this tense situation, there was also the matter of the time at which the bell of fire time would ring, as presented by Yorna. Time was precious. The more he wasted, the more his life diminished. In silence, Tarita's fingers trembled as she gripped her bow, and Al and Medium too muffled their breaths. Even Louis miraculously was only letting out growls, perhaps instinctively sensing the danger posed by Albert. Perhaps they could not decide to stir. If someone could, it would be Subaru, Abel. Abel. Quietly, Subaru called out Abel's name. It was visible that his consciousness had turned towards him through the Oni mask upon hearing it. His eyes were invisible, as the Oni mask blocked his gaze, but his attention was directed at Subaru. The feelings there could not be seen. However, Subaru could guess its intent, as he had felt it. Subaru, this is the Emperor, Vincent Valaquia. Albert, on? In reply to Abel's gaze, Subaru made that assertion, prompting Albert to raise an eyebrow. His eyes hidden by his long, rich eyebrows went open wide, as the old man was suspicious of Subaru's words. It was a natural reaction, but it was far from the reaction he was looking for. So, in order to elicit the desired response, they would go deeper. Subaru, you want to know who's the faceless young un, and what we're here for? Why did we come to see Yorna? The answer is... Albert, oh, that's not very funny, is it? Subaru, I wasn't trying to be funny. Abel. At a loss for words for an instance, Albert's voice was laced with a hint of surprise. Perceiving that with clarity, Subaru called out to Abel at the back of the room. This far in the game, Abel did not try to refute Subaru's words and actions. Just inaudibly, his gentle fingers reached for his face. And then... Albert, this is one hell of a thing. A concealed visage was revealed in front of Albert, the latter letting out a voice of astonishment. Before his eyes, the one gazing back at Albert as his face was tense, was a dark-haired beauty none other than the Emperor, Vincent Valaquia. Albert, Your Excellency? But that's too weird, isn't it? But then, who'd I come why? Abel, let your old wits run wild, Albert Dunkelkin. You possess the answers. All that remains is to draw them out. Albert, with the face of Your Excellency, saying things that sound like Your Excellency. Ah, so that's it. At first he had been taken aback, but the old shinobi soon regained his composure. Having revealed his face, Abel passed in order as the Emperor, and doing as he had said, Albert seemed to come to a conclusion of the situation he was in with the information he had. Albert put his hand on his chin, and... Albert, then that'd be Chi Sha. He's got it all under control. There's another matter, though. It's not like ya, Your Excellency, to let something like that happen to ya, is it? Abel, you think your eyes can peer into the depths of my mind? Albert, oh, very scary, very scary. Waving both his hands in the air, he let out a parched sound at Abel's answer. In fact, as Albert had stated, Abel's situation was definitely a groggy one, but his overwhelming bluff did not show any of that. Upon seeing the change in Albert's expression, however, the tension left Subaru's shoulders as well. Albert understood the situation. Abel had been ousted from his position as emperor, and Vincent, the man he was accompanying, was a false emperor. Albert, a lot of things that'd been confusing me have become clear. No, I was wondering why you suddenly came to see the fox girl in person. Subaru, all of that was to stifle the actions of our side. Albert, it's hard for old people to keep up with the ideas of you smart folks, actually. Young, smart, good looking, I guess that's being super greedy. Don't ya think so, too? Don't ya think? Since you're also so young. Oh, that's because of what I did. Kaka. Albert roared with laughter, trying to get a laugh out of them with what he had said, even though it was not funny. Subaru's cheeks tightened at the sight, and he exhaled a long breath, suddenly looking at Tarita. The Shudrak warrior still kept a wary eye, her bow trained on Albert. He was attempting to get her to break her battle stance, and regain control of the situation. Subaru, Tarita-san, you can put your bow down now. Albert sans. Albert, oh? No, you don't have to put it down, do ya? I think it's impossible for that girl to lower her guard in front of someone she's not sure isn't an enemy. Subaru, Albert himself, the target of Tarita's bow, was the one to halt Subaru's effort to get her to lower her guard and talk to him. The old man took Tarita's caution as something natural, furthermore he did not do anything to try to deny the naturalness that was incomprehensible for Subaru. In other words, the danger stemming from himself had not lessened. However, then it would be as if. Subaru, let's talk about this. Albert, didn't ya hear me? I said I'd make a decision after I listened to ya. And I did. Subaru's throat clogged up, yet, faced with that, Albert's attitude did not alter. There was merely a quiet click of the tongue, and... Abel, this was one of those cards I did not know which way it would tend towards, but that is what you have decided, Albert, that doesn't sound like ya, Your Excellency. No, it's fatal that you're seriously out of cards to play. And to boot, you weren't lucky on the draw here. You know, I've always wanted to try it. Abel, and that would be? Albert's plan was set, and the shinobi head honcho laughed at the words of the ousted emperor. A laugh, suitable for the man holding the title of vicious old man. Albert, with me being an old man with not long left to live, I've always wholeheartedly wanted to try and kill the emperor, to have a glorious death. Everyone, hook. The moment that vicious wish was spoken, movement occurred amidst that highly strung environment. That very moment, Tarita, Al, and Medium all moved to frustrate Albert's purpose, overriding the no-fighting rule given to each one of them. However, Albert, yesterday, I couldn't understand what trick you were using, one-armed one. But it stopped working since you turned little, didn't it? Al, hook. Albert, can't use the skills you learned at a later age when you're young. Having spoken those words, Albert twisted his neck and swung his hands. Blood splattered from his fingertips, and a tragedy unfolded in Subaru's field of vision, his eyes open to their utmost. Medium and Al, who had stepped in and tried to subdue Albert, had their necks gouged out and blood spouted out. The blood scattered within the room like a fountain, making a person wonder where had so much blood flowed within a small child's body. Al, hook. Albert, judging from this, looks like you aren't able to use your last ray of hope. Still, I ended up doing it in before finding out how your trick works, that's how it was, huh? I messed up. Al crouched there, holding the gushing wound. Medium's eyes went blank and she fell backward, motionless. It was obvious that what they had suffered was a fatal wound that could not be recovered from. And Tarita, the only one ready to take on Albert head-on. Subaru, Subaru had been wondering why a shot had not been loosened from the bow. However, the suspicion that the attack that was supposed to take place did not, made Subaru direct his gaze in that direction. Tarita was pinned to the wall. Tall for a woman, Tarita's slender frame was rested against the wall, her body pinned in place. The reason for her immobilization was a throwing weapon protruding from the center of her cleavage, a shuriken. As if some kind of joke, the star-shaped projectile had pierced Tarita's chest, skewering her back and pinning her to the wall. Her heart had been destroyed, it was clear she had perished instantly. Abel, even though you were told not to interfere, you could not help yourself. Suddenly, a man's voice echoed in that room rife with death. It had come from Abel, standing in a room that had become full of corpses terrifyingly fast. Having left his seat, the man looked down with a penetrating gaze at Albert, the architect of all this death. Bathed in that glare, Albert wiped the blood splattered on his cheek with his finger. Albert, yeah. I want to set off some big fireworks before I die. I'd be completely satisfied to murder the greatest emperor of all time and be executed for it. Abel, I couldn't read your destructive tastes. My oversight. Albert, kaka. No, if my dreams of growing old were known, I'd be so ashamed that I wouldn't be able to live. Al had ceased moving, and Medium and Tarita had stopped breathing. Under such circumstances, that conversation between emperor and vassal seemed, to Subaru, to be something from another world. However, it was not another world. It was real. Real, overwhelming reality. This was the reality that Subaru had arrived at, after making the wrong choice. Albert, once I'm done with your excellency, I'll go back to Chisha. I'm sure he'll be able to handle my death just fine. Subaru, hook. Albert, oh, you're still there. To Subaru, who had spoken up too late, Albert turned around, the latter plunging into the atmosphere that marked finality. The old man turned his neck with a snap to keep Subaru, his own face rigid, in check. Then, pointing to those fallen, Al, Medium and Tarita in turn. Albert, that's that. These guys tried to kill me, so I killed them back, but there really isn't a reason for you to die, right? I don't have the intention to become a fugitive, so there's no reason to silence you as well. Subaru, Albert, guess I went ahead and spoke a lot again. It's obvious that you got something to say, so open your mouth. I'm an old man with a short life ahead of me, so I can't wait that long though, you know? As Albert continued to speak leisurely at his own pace, Subaru's thoughts turned white. No, his thoughts were being dyed a bright red. Whether it was anger or the color of the blood that Al and the others had shed, even Subaru himself could not tell. But even so, whatever, at any rate, never, here. Abel, fool. And so, those contemptuous words came from Abel. Currently, his gaze must be piercing the back of Subaru's head. Feeling the pressure of his sharp gaze, Subaru was made keenly aware of the accuracy of his words. There was no point in standing up for Abel now, with this. If he had been able to act in such a manner before L, Medium and Tarita had fallen, perhaps it would have been possible to change something. Louis, you. Albert, oi, you're even using a lil girl that's got no connection to me? Your Excellency's method of doing things must have been something that women and young children hated for sure. In front of Albert, who was putting his hand on his forehand, stood Louis. No, Louis was not standing in front of Albert, but in front of Subaru. Subaru was shielding Abel, and Louis was shielding Subaru, the three of them standing in a straight line. It was just some absurd form of a meat shield. Albert, I thought your Excellency was supposed to die alone. Abel. Not everything goes according to one's calculations. Albert, kaka. Abel's inability to keep his mouth shut at this point was met with a sneer and a loud laugh from Albert. Within the eyes of the elderly shinobi, neither Subaru's nor Louis's presence were reflected. But he was not so kind as to overlook those who stood before him with hostility. Henceforth, Subaru, I'll never forgive you. Natsuki Subaru's young body spurted blood and sank into a cold pool of blood, searing into his mind the face of the shinobi as the latter guffawed viciously during his attempt to satisfy his ambition. And so, blood flowed and a hot sensation gushed from the wound. The hotness that overflowed endlessly, however, instantly drained the heat from his body. That which had flowed out rapidly swallowed him, drowned him, rendered him invisible, and then, after he had sunk to the depths of the ocean, he would. Subaru! Instantly, the lost blood coursed through Subaru's body, producing a loud noise in his ears. Accompanying the sensation of having his hearing sharpened to the extreme, came the cacophony of blood flowing through him in a quiet space. While being struck by it over his whole body, Subaru let out a ragged exhalation. With violence he bit his back teeth, his vision flickering on and off due to the distant pain and sense of loss. He wished to find out where he had returned to. I've taken the liberty of making tea for myself, does anyone else want some? A moment later, a vicious, unforgettable voice announced the overture of a new battle for Natsuki Subaru. End of chapter 40 and 41, Natchuki Subawu.